Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is Ian. I'm a marketing manager with SOFTRAX. I'm joined today by an excellent panel. We're very excited that you could all join us today, especially on this holiday week. And I will just take another minute. We'll wait one more minute as we still have some stragglers, trickling in. But this will be a CPE eligible webinar. So just to go through a few housekeeping things before we get started. There will be 3 polling questions sprinkled throughout the presentation. So please, if you're interested in CPE credit, do answer the polling questions through your GoToWebinar console. If you have technical difficulties, please just submit a chat or a question and let us know about it. At any point during the presentation, if you have questions, please feel free to use that question box. If there's time at the end, we'll be happy to get to all questions. And if we run out of time and you still have a question that hasn't been answered, we'll follow up with an email after the fact. If you qualify for CPE credit, if you stayed the duration of the webinar and you answer the polling questions, then we will distribute the CPE certificate tomorrow via email. No additional action required from you. So if you don't receive it tomorrow, feel free to let us know and we will double check. So one more final note, there will be a post-webinar survey. If you don't mind filling out the post-webinar survey, it's important not just for CPE purposes, but also for our speakers, for feedback, and for shaping future content, making sure that it is applicable, it's relevant, and it is focused. So with that, I will go ahead and I will introduce our panel today. We're joined by an excellent panel. We have from CFGI, Chad Mello, Managing Director over at CFGI. He has a long track record of experience with his clients. He is experienced with complex accounting solutions across multiple industries, and he has significant experience with revenue recognition, including ASC 606. We're also joined by Kyle Britto, a Senior Manager over at CFGI. He also has a long track record of a variety of technical areas, including the implementation of software systems, including our very own, specifically regarding revenue recognition around ASC 606. So we're happy to be joined by both Chad and Kyle from CFGI. And additionally, we are joined by Tom Zauli, the SVP and GM of SOFTRAX. Tom has a long track record in sales organizations and in engineering organizations, and he's a very forward thinker in the space. It should be an excellent panel, and we're all very excited. We're happy that you could all join us today. So for a brief agenda, we're going to hit on 3, I think, main high-level points. A background into continuous accounting, what you can expect in levels of automation in the back office, and really a checklist of how to get started in this process. So with that, I think I can turn it over to Chad.
Great, thanks, Ian. Go on to the next slide, if we could, please. Great, so as we get started, I first want to set the stage in defining, what the concept of continuous accounting, is ultimately referring to, right? So at a 40,000-foot view, this is all really referring back to the consistent optimization of workloads over a period or some period of time, rather than all at once, right? So think of smoothing out the peaks and valleys of work throughout the month versus waiting all till the end of the month. As part of this initiative, there's a strong emphasis also in leveraging technology and automation wherever possible, overall due to its efficiency potential, right? So as companies are on this continuous path, finance transformation overall, the deployment of its people, processes, and technology is going to be going through a constant reevaluation, throughout the period, which is an interesting topic because if you think about it, the goals of finance generally remain static. This can be or differ based on the overall size and complexity of the company, but in general, they don't drastically change, right? So think of some of the typical initiatives, things such as, the company wants to close the books faster, mitigate risks of error, implementing, more efficient controls, fixing reporting, and so on. Nothing really new here, right? But what we're seeing is that even though the goals may not be changing, how companies are achieving these goals is continuing to shift more and more in the direction of better leveraging technology and trying to take the human error out of the equation as much as possible. Go to the next slide if we could, please.
So it looks like we had our first polling question there. So Chad, if that's all right with you, should we fire this one up?
Oh, sorry, Ian, I think you jumped one too many.
Oh, did I? Or how's that? Maybe the polling question was one too early.
Yeah, right there is good. Thank you. So I think first, before we get to we're all excited for the polling question. Before we get there, though, I think it's important to also understand, why the technology shift. Why is this happening now, and why is there more of an emphasis on technology at the present rather than before, right? And there are many operational reasons, but the ease of access to that technology, is a very large part of it, right? Where we used to hear about Fortune 50 and Fortune 500 companies, utilizing automation, think of kind of the gold standard, the auto or the airline industry, where we've got an end-to-end, automation process. What we're seeing now is that the middle and smaller markets are now also able to take advantage because the technology itself is evolving. And as more companies have adopted automation in one way or another, the tech is becoming more common in the marketplace, as a result of this, which in turn then leads to, more use cases in the market and inherently increasing, platform stability of the different solutions. So automation now is not just perceived as being beneficial, but it's also less risky because it's not perceived as, an emergent technology anymore, right? Now it's much more common. So another reason, or a big reason, that we're seeing this is that in many systems, they've moved away from, what we consider a fully customized solution. So think of, older ERPs, legacy ERPs that are going through a lot of, coding, for example, for logic. And the newer systems are leveraging, a flexible configuration model. Think more toggle switches, turning on and off, rather than that actual, custom coding with specific logic being built for each individual customer. And this is going to have an impact in a few areas, ultimately driving, opportunities and efficiencies in the process. And the first is that, they're going to be a lot quicker to implement, because there's transferability, or there can be transferability, in how implementers are thinking about it and how they can leverage configurations of similar use cases, company over company. A configuration at a SaaS company with a monthly billing cadence, for example, it's going to be fairly similar to another SaaS company. So we have comparability now, thus allowing it to be stood up quicker and faster. But at the same time, the concept can also be applied against, system testing as well as you're going through that implementation cycle. It's going to be a lot easier to predict the outcome of a defined configuration rather than going through that custom code in the event that something isn't working properly, right? And then as a byproduct of that, the remediation of that finding is also going to be simplified. The next kind of key areas where I think we're seeing this more and more is that the systems are much more pliable, right? They're information agnostic, in that they're able to ingest data from almost a limitless list of sources, right? And this is going to solve a variety of challenges, with data consolidation, and it really encourages growth within the ecosystem with less limitations in which, other systems are going to be present in the infrastructure. So overall, less restriction, and more agility within the IT sandbox. And for example, we have customers where flat files are the primary source of record because there is a manual intervention in the actual process, all the way through, end-to-end full automation in a global consolidation, right? So it has the ability to handle kind of both sides of the spectrum. And then lastly, these systems are designed, with flexibility of ownership in mind, providing companies with flexibility and control desired to maintain the systems on an ongoing basis, right? So there's less dependency on the actual software vendor themselves, and a lot of that stuff can now be brought in-house because it is a more realistic approach, right? Because of that configurable nature. It's also not uncommon, for super users, not only to reside within the company rather than the vendor, but also to reside actually within the house of finance itself, rather than other outside departments like IT, who may be one arm's length away from the actual transactions that are being entered into. And then the final point, which I started to allude to already, is more efficient deployment of what we like to call micro automation in general, right? And one misconception is that, automation needs to be an all or nothing approach, which is just not the case anymore. It's actually much more common for companies to start with one or two processes, and expand the ecosystem over time, rather than jumping all in, kind of taking bite-sized pieces, identifying which processes would have the most benefit, and going after those proof of concept, first and foremost. And this is going to allow overall for lower cost of entry, as well as better selection of the processes where that maximum benefit can be achieved. Thus, ultimately increasing the power of ROI sooner, faster, quicker. And then now, Ian, we can get into the exciting polling question.
Excellent. And the first question, thank you very much, Chad. Appreciate it. First question is, very simply, where are you on this path to continuous accounting? Is it the first you're hearing of it? Are you aware of continuous accounting but have no current plans to move in that direction? Do you plan to move there in the future, or are you currently on the path starting out? Are you currently on the path completed or nearly completed? So I will go ahead and launch the poll.
It'll be interesting to see if there's a good percentage of people that are done or nearly done on this question. In past polls, there have not been. It's been most of the people were either on the path or contemplating starting to walk down this path. So.
Yeah, exactly, Tom. And another thing to consider, because of the idea of micro automation as well, it may be a continuous cycle too. Having already adopted some form of automation, but now looking at to an eye of what's next, what's coming next.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I think as long as you've taken some step, whether it's, trying to drive more automation in AR or RevRec or, whatever place, I mean, you are effectively on the path. So.
It looks like we're up over 90%. So if you're still thinking, please just go ahead and submit your vote, and we'll go ahead and close the poll in another few seconds. And for results.
Interesting. Okay. So I would say there's more in this response compared to others. There are more, it's weighted more toward first people are hearing of it, which is good. I mean, we want to spread the word on this because I do think it's exciting, and I do think it will really help businesses that learn of it and seek more knowledge, basically. And next significant percentage. So some people first hearing, some people aware, very few with no plans to move that are aware of it, but yet very few that are on the path or done. So yeah, I mean, probably some conservatism in terms of, I think a lot of companies, to Chad's point, they're taking steps that actually would lead or would be the steps that they would take if continuous accounting was the goal anyway. So they're establishing a starting point. If you're learning of continuous accounting for the first time, and what you hear in the webinar makes sense, there is value there, because I think dealing with, like Chad mentioned, I mean, taking a micro step approach, I also believe is the right move. Doing so in the context of an overall cohesive plan toward an ultimate end goal, I think it will drive some efficiencies in the steps you take and help you get there quicker. So that's what I would add to this. Yeah. All right. So I wanted to speak a little bit about agility. I will say, as the counterpoint to the type of high-level automation that continuous accounting offers, it really doesn't have to be a counterpoint. I think you can achieve both, but it's something to be weighed, because if you imagine, automation doesn't come for free, right? I mean, there's an investment that has to be made. There is work that has to be done. As Chad mentioned, in the 90s and the 2000s, you saw a lot of, especially in the larger companies, a lot of customization of an existing ERP system to meet the demands of the business. The problem is, as you layer on either customizations, more technology, what have you, even to some degree, a large structure of spreadsheets, then the ability to alter course, to keep up with the business, which is obviously very important, it could be at risk. And one of the classic examples that I probably cite too often, but it was a favorite of Steve Jobs as well, is the case of MCI friends and family, basically. And what happened there is you're talking about a company that was at the time something of an upstart, trying to compete with AT&T, the former Ma Bell, basically. On long distance services, and it was very interesting. There's actually a case study on this. I think it's available to Stanford site, but very interesting that MCI rolled out their friends and family plan, which basically it was a new billing model for long distance services at the time, and it allowed for much cheaper long distance service costs, as long as both members, the caller and the receiver, were on the friends and family plan, and it therefore had a somewhat viral effect. What was the super interesting point about it was that MCI began to take market share from AT&T. You would think that AT&T could have reacted and offered a similar plan, but the reality was that they, even with their vast resources, they were not able to alter the back office systems to handle the processing that was required to support a friends and family like plan. By the time they were able to get there, they had lost substantial market share to MCI, thereby establishing MCI as a legitimate competitor, and they never regained it, or it took them anyway many years to regain it. So always, I think when you're thinking about your strategy for the back office, thinking about automation, but with keeping one eye on agility as well. So, and then Ian, I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah. I think Kyle.
Awesome.
Yeah, Kyle's going to introduce sort of levels of automation in the next section.
Perfect. So thank you, Ian, for the introduction, and thank you, Chad and Tom, for setting the stage. So I'm here today to talk with us about what does it all mean, kind of why are we all here? And to go through that, I wanted to spend some time talking about the 3 stages of automation. So we have stage 1, which is no automation, fully manual. Stage 2, where there's some automation with some human involvement. And stage 3, where we're fully automated. And we will go through all these in detail on the following slides. Some key things to note there, that there's no hard fast cutoff between the different stages. In fact, most of the clients we see fall somewhere in between stage 1 and 2, a place I like to call stage 1.5. Reaching stage 3 will free up your employees for more business critical decisions. One thing to remember is that there's a sliding scale between the 3 stages, between flexibility and agility that Tom was just talking about. And that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution in this. You can be in a couple different stages at a time. Finally, as we go through all the stages, one key theme to remember through all these stages, they also have a trade-off between how much effort, time, and investment it takes to be in each one of the stages. As we're going through these stages, I will highlight the amount of each that is needed. We will look at these stages via the revenue process, even though automation can be applied anywhere and in any process by leveraging technologies. And then for our public companies, we also want to start to think about our audits, our control environment, and our audit fees when we go through these different stages. So Ian, can we go to the next one? Perfect. So here we are at stage 1. This is a very manual process using Excel to record our revenue, also using Excel to generate our entries and our disclosures. This could lead to errors due due to the human involvement in this. And as we go through these stages, we're going to follow a company A, through the different degrees of automation and see how it applies to that company. So in this stage here, company A They have very knowledgeable staff who knows and understands ASC 606 and how it applies to the company. Company's AA accounting department receives a customer order and records this in their Excel spreadsheets. And these spreadsheets are used to generate revenue waterfalls and also to generate our monthly entries. However, the entries that are generated are actually being keyed in to the ERP system because there's no automation here, right? We're all in spreadsheets here. And in this example, talking about the effort is going to be pretty high here because it's all manual. When the accounting department receives an order, they're going to have to take the time to understand the impact and how to record revenue. The time is also going to be high because it's going to take some time to just review those items. And the investment is low, right? We're just talking about Excel spreadsheets here, no real system just yet. In this kind of stage here, you're going to talk about more time if there's ever a modification or a change to a customer agreement, because you're going to have to figure out how much revenue has been recognized, how much is left to recognize, and kind of what the right entry is for that. Also in this stage here, you're going to be very control heavy. You're going to need controls around input review, the calculation, the posting of the entry, and then just management's own kind of review of the whole process. There are some benefits though to stage one. The first one being it does provide you more agility and more flexibility. You have the ability to review contracts more in detail and more specialized contracts. And we typically see this with customers that have a smaller group of customers, but higher dollar value. So construction, things of that nature. And as I mentioned, in this stage, you can deal with specialized contracts better than the other two stages just because you're reviewing all those manually. And as you're sitting in stage one, you're gonna start to think to yourself, when do I transition to stage two? What are kind of some of the key indicators? And those can be new products, you're starting to see more volume of your contracts, or if, like Chad mentioned, you might want a shorter close window. So those are some of the triggers we're seeing when people hop to stage two. And with that, we'll go on to the next slide. Perfect. So welcome to stage two. This is very similar to stage one, where you have your knowledgeable staff, and the difference being some of your process is manual and some is automated. You could even have a single standalone ERP system and a revenue subledger. If we continue with our example of company A, they have now went out and purchased an off-the-shelf revenue subledger system. The system now will take the customer order and generate revenue waterfalls. But to do so, it requires some manual data inputs. The inputs will help it calculate revenue, deferred revenue, and your contract assets. Some of these inputs include service start dates or delivery dates, decisions to bundle or not bundle, professional services or training, and then the actual usage of that professional service or training. Once the system has these inputs, it can calculate the revenue and related entries. However, and this is key, it does not interface with the current ERP system. Instead, the entries it does generate need to be manually uploaded, and this is where the problems can arise, similar to stage one. The difference here is the system will actually give us entries as opposed to making our own entries. Sometimes entries are not posted or just posted incorrectly. And in this stage, if you look back to our pillars here, your effort is going to be moderate. Again, you're running two systems, so you just got to be a little careful there. Your time can be high to moderate depending on volume of contracts, but once again, with the two systems, it's going to be a little bit higher than stage one. And then investment is moderate, right? You're buying two systems. Also in this stage, it is still control heavy, but you're starting to get to see some relief through automation and a lot more tested one for our auditors. Also, when contract modifications do occur at this stage, it's a little easier to calculate out revenue recognized to date, future revenue, and helping you identify what the actual accounting for that is. And as I mentioned in the beginning, most of our customers tend to fall between this stage and stage one. So stage 1.5, so I feel like we see a lot of people here. Some of the benefits of stage two is you have more more automation and a little bit of a mix with manual. So it allows you to focus on your specialized contracts, your kind of one-off unique deals that you might be offering, but you can still process the standard contracts as a business operates. You typically see this a lot when you have a period of high growth and you're starting to wonder, when do you kind of scale up for your business? Do you want to scale through automation, in essence getting to stage 3, or do you want to scale through adding more people to your finance staff? And that kind of leads into the whole transition of thinking, do I want to be more standardized, which is stage 3, like more cut and dry process, or I still want to have some flexibility? With that, we'll actually go to stage 3. Perfect, thank you. So stage 3, the last stage in this whole process here. This is when you're going to have a fully automated solution. During the implementation, you would establish your policies on how to identify, policies on how to account for different revenue scenarios that are relevant to your company. And that's the key part there. So you want to make sure when you're going through it, it's actually through your implementation that you're selecting scenarios that apply to your company. These policies then become your rules during implementation, and these rules are used to identify scenarios and apply the correct accounting treatment. So we finish up with our company A that we saw in stage 1. They have went out and they've upgraded their system, and it now has those rules built into place during the implementation. And those rules help it decide what gets bundled, how to recognize the professional services that are being used. And now the system actually integrates with their ERP system. And it feeds the ERP system the calculated revenue, deferred revenue, and contract assets. In this last example here, the effort's going to be high during the implementation, but it will tend to drop off to low as you once the implementation is done. Time is going to be low. Again, it's all going to be automated here for us. And investment is moderate to high, depending on the system and the customizations you make based upon your business needs. If we think about this from a control environment as well, you're going to start to rely on automated controls. Your control environment should be a little bit smaller, a lot more test of 1 for our lovely auditors there. The other thing to think about in stage 3 is once you're post implementation, you want to make sure you have a system that can handle new products if you offer new products, or if there are new accounting rules, right? You want to make sure you have a system that's nimble enough to respond back to any new changes. Some features are being fully automated. You got a lot more reporting, a lot more dashboards, things of that nature. And like we keep mentioning, there is not all companies will get to level 3, right? There's going to be that trade-off between standardization and flexibility. You can have some flexibility in stage 3. It's not impossible, but you see it a lot more in stage 2 and stage 1. And throughout all of this, I just want to make sure we remember that the process hasn't changed. The tools that we are using have, and that's what's making us see this a lot more and a lot more of our clients today. And with that, I will turn it over to the next polling question.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kyle. Our next polling question is, very simply based on the 3 levels of automation that Kyle just outlined. At which level is your company? Are you still using, primarily manual solutions? Are you using mostly Excel? Do you have automation in place, but there are still manual touches involved in processing each contract? Or are you fully automated in the way you process your contracts? So I'll go ahead and launch over here.
So while people are answering the question, I think an interesting point to consider is that, Kyle discussed how, businesses are different. I mean, a business that has very standardized processes is more likely to be able to adapt to a level 3 than someone that has a lot of non-standard contracts. And, there is call it wiggle room or something there whereby, you can look at a non-standard business and look at how the guidance is being applied and how contracts are written, for example. Maybe slight modification to how the business is either written or done. So, what you end up achieving, if done right, is you don't, sort of change the business to adapt to back office finance, but you do make slight tweaks, in the areas I described, such that more of your processing lends itself to automation, and you're more, it's easier to attain the next level up, whether it be level 2 or level 3. And I think an organization like CFGI it's a very powerful organization in the sense that they understand the guidance very well, but they also understand the technologies out there and what they're capable of, and can help perform those kinds of translations to try to help you get to the next level. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect, Tom. Like you said, it's all about kind of adapting through the different stages, like and just make sure your business is up to speed on that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Right. Thanks, guys. Just another couple of seconds here. If you're still considering, please just submit your vote, and I will close up in another few seconds. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So right in line with past surveys, we have just not seen a lot of people at level 3. We do see them out there, so it is possible. But at this point in time, with the newness of the technologies and the amount of regulatory change, I would argue that
Did we lose Tom's audio? Chad, are you still there? Can you hear Kyle?
I think Tom dropped off.
Oh, and it looks like Tom got off.
We did.
Okay, well, that's okay.
Yeah, and this is also too, looking at the results, this is consistent to what Kyle was saying in terms of what we're seeing in the market as well. And when we think of the level 1, 2, and 3, I know that level 3 has the bigger number. It's the more shiny and attractive answer. That's where we must be trying to push you towards, right? And that's not necessarily the case. It's going to be a different size fits most, but not one size fits all, right? So the fact that you're in Excel spreadsheets doesn't mean to go home and go back and redraw the entire process. Depending on where you are in the growth strategy, it may actually be much more economical for you to be at that level 1.5, which is what we're seeing, right? Where we're seeing such a tremendous amount of new product development, new sales creativeness, and how their go-to-market strategies, where because the environment is constantly changing, automation is a hybrid fit, right? Because of the processes are constantly changing, well, then the technology as a result of that would constantly need to be changing. So it's a matter of, when we go back to that micro automation, identifying which processes, or at least static enough or nimble enough where you can bend the rules from a logic perspective to accommodate for slight changes, to be able to drive forward on what you're trying to actually achieve here. So I wanted to make that one distinction.
Great.
I'm back, by the way, guys. Sorry if my network dropped.
It's good to have you back. I believe the next slide is Chad's anyway, though.
Perfect. Okay, so based off the first 2 polling questions, I think this is actually going to be more appropriate level of detail. I was actually a little bit concerned at first this was a little bit too light, given we're seeing a lot of our clients, but it sounds like it's going to be right on par here. So what we want to touch on next is really some key things to consider as you start to go through the thought process for how to better incorporate technology and automation in your organization, right? And this is important because a lot of the clients that we are assisting with these types of projects often have a good idea or a great idea, right? They know their processes best, of what they would like to or need to change, but often find that kicking things off is one of the most difficult parts. Once things are in motion, they're in motion, but getting it to that state and over the hurdle is one of the biggest challenges. Now, keep in mind that this is extremely high level, right? We could do an entire presentation on just this topic alone. So when we get to the survey at the end, if that is something that folks are interested in, let's make sure we can document so we can expand that on a future webinar. But ultimately, this section is going to be broken down into 3 subsections, right? Really resolving on the who, the what, and the how, right, of how to get started. So we'll start with the who, and really talking here about the stakeholders, right? And when it comes to the stakeholders, the key point is that there are many and often with varied and competing priorities, right? It goes without saying, right? Not all of it is overly complex, but it still lends itself to the fact. And this extends both internally and externally. So identifying that proper team can actually improve the overall success of the project right from the start, right? And for free. When looking internally, identifying the right people and getting them involved can, earlier in the process can help uncover and also resolve, a key piece here being resolve, any unintended, roadblocks or things that you didn't foresee down the pipeline. Some examples of things that we've seen, could be updates to ERPs that needed to take place. And we worked with a government manufacturer in the recent past where they had a security patch needed for SAP that after testing and deployment was going to take 6 months, thus kicking their automation deployment down the road 8 to 10 months, give or take, because there were other periphery updates needed as well within the ecosystem. And then, or as another example, even just obtaining executive sponsorship, to help drive governance and process change. If their contracts are being entered into at the front end, at the sales level, and there are specific terms or non-standard terms that keep making their way into contracts, thus adding complexity, to the sales transaction cycle, having inverse accounting rules and creating a lot of manual work, driving change at the top level. But this also extends to external resources as well, that aren't necessarily in the company's control, right? And some of these are, I think, taken for granted sometimes, right? And this goes for the software vendors themselves even, right? Because that there's more traction and movement in the marketplace with automation, so isn't the dependency on having the software vendors being available. As an extension of that, also the system integrators, choosing the right partner, making sure that you're allowing enough lead time to do the diligence around selecting the right partner, to assist, with the overall implementation effort. And then lastly, something that probably is also overlooked is what about the auditors, right? Paying consideration to any system change that could then ultimately impact any financial data, depending on when that change is made throughout the year. Well, now that system could be under the scope of the audit. If you're public, there's certain SOX requirements. Or if it's performed at the end of the year, what manual processes or parallel processing is going to need to be performed to supplement whether or not the system's leveraged, for that year's audit or not. And then also allowing time, for the auditors to work through their diligence in relation to the new platform. The next point is going to be really around being realistic, right? And this is something that comes up a lot with the level of automation that the company is actually looking to achieve, okay? So it's not uncommon, to hear, responses as we're doing questionnaires with clients to this before understanding what is actually attainable, given that the company's, data and process flows, environment, what that looks like, and understanding what that looks like. For example, if a company is looking for 100% of its sales transactions to be fully automated, but a large portion are non-standard contracts, I think we've talked about that a couple times here, the expectation may not be in alignment based off of what's currently achievable, right? What we're looking for with automation is that autonomy, right? That kind of sliding scale from level 1 to level 3, but looking at some level of standardization, right? So we can say, okay, out of 100% of our population, I've got 80% that are standardized. I can automate those 80%. The 20% we need to now look at through a manual process. Starting to do that type of diligence is going to be important in bringing down what's going to be realistic. It's easy to say we want to get to 100%, but it's not always achievable. And that doesn't mean it's okay to have a past state and a desired future state as you're going through this process. You just need to understand, what else needs to change to get to the future state and what processes need to supplement the automation until the company gets there. So in my 80-20 example, it's not that the 20% may never be able to get there. Maybe it needs some slight tweaks and you can get to 90% very quickly. well, what are we going to do with that 10% as we're going, the hanging 10% as we're going through this? What supplementary procedures do we need to perform to prepare for that, so it's not going to, 10% is going to derail the entire project? So do remember that, when we're thinking about automation as that sliding scale from level 1 to level 3, think of it as that fluid evolution. Depending on what's being automated, there's an absolute trade-off, between that strict standardization, of level 3, in allowing the sales team to be more creative of level 1, right? Although the latter is going to be more difficult for accounting, it may be more beneficial for the organization's overall growth strategy, and having less options, for automation, or needing to get more creative with automation. As Kyle had mentioned, it's definitely not always a one-size-fits-all approach. And then the final point that I wanted to touch on, is a key focus, of something that we see over and over and over again. And it's something that can be thought through even prior to selecting a vendor. As you're going through identifying what processes you're looking to automate, there's a lot of stuff that can be done, and I'll define stuff in a moment, but there's a lot of stuff that can be done prior to and leading up to that vendor selection. And I know this is something that's been near and dear to my heart, and Tom, yours as well. But think of things like, data augmentation, data cleanliness, process changes that are going to need to be, deployed upon. If you're doing your site mapping and you're starting to understand what the processes that you're trying to automate are, well, kind of step one is understanding the ins and outs of that process, the dependencies of that process, and what the desired output of that process are going to be. What truly are, those business requirements. This is especially true, when they're discovered, halfway through, right? So we sign up for a vendor, and quite often what we'll find is that the day one of the kickoff, there's a very long list for the company to work through and a very short list for the software implementers to work through. Thus then necessitating, an extension of the timeline by X number of months as you're working through that. And a lot of this stuff, even though the automation may live within the house of finance, it's going to have a leg or an arm that's going to extend beyond finance. That's going to then, add more complexity in terms of what changes need to be made. It may seem very simplistic to add another record or a field, to your ERP, for informational purposes, so you can link certain fields together. Well, that one particular field could actually be catastrophic in terms of how the source system is set up, depending on other dependencies. So I guess the key point there is just remember that, if you don't build this into the process up front, and if you do, go further down, maybe you're not sure, maybe, the requirement here is to, maybe the timeline doesn't allow for it, maybe that there's an expedited timeline and we need to get the vendors in as quick as possible and work in tandem together. Just make sure that you are building in some time, to accommodate for that upfront requirements gathering, because it is probably a 1/3 of the effort, if you will, of the overall implementation effort, and it, is more within the company's control.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would agree, Chad. I think that data migration in general is one of the long poles of any implementations that we do. So.
So thank you, guys. With that, we do have another polling question. So, another fairly simple question: which consideration out of the following is the most important to you, if you were to consider evolving your system? Is that, the efficiency, increases in efficiency through reductions in manual labor? Is that reducing risk through implementing better security and controls? Is that shortening your close process, or is that, increased agility? So I will go ahead and launch the question.
Yeah, I'm interested to see the results. I don't want to bias it ahead of the results, but it's past surveys have been sort of non-intuitive in terms of the response. But we'll see what comes up here.
And I'll just say again, we do have a couple of questions, flowing in already. So please don't be shy. If there are questions top of mind, please feel free to submit them.
Yeah, I would say also any questions that we can't get to by the end of the hour, which is coming up, we'll try to answer via email or a direct follow-up. And then to Chad's earlier point, if you do have a particular area you'd like us to speak on, in greater depth, just put that in the survey that comes up at the end of this, and we will definitely take that into account and try to do that.
Yeah, really just scratching the surface on a lot of these concepts.
Yeah, it's a broad area for sure. Yeah.
Great. So it looks like most responses are in. So again, I'll close in another couple of seconds. So thank you for answering.
Oh, okay. And not as non-intuitive as the last few that we've seen. So interestingly, the first one is the one that you would expect would be the largest. In some of the past surveys, it's actually been risk reduction that's been either on par with efficiency or close. And the short and close process and agility ones, they have scored lower, but we bring up agility in this conversation just to keep it on people's minds, because people are so, often the temptation is to be so focused on the next thing to do in terms of automation, and less focused on, okay, what are the implications long term as my business changes? Is this infrastructure going to change with me, or am I going to have to do something very unnatural to get it to move? So I don't know, Chad, if you have any comments on the result.
No, absolutely, Tom. And I think, this is in alignment with the first two polling questions in terms of where everybody is on the call. And one of the probably biggest misconceptions, when we talk about manual effort and trying to reduce, and there's a whole host of things that come along with that, and efficiencies with automation. But one of the biggest misconceptions, that we've heard over the past couple of years, in when we're working on projects with clients and the people that we're working with on those clients, is that, well, what do we do with now that manual effort has been reduced? Is that ultimately then, start to equate towards, labor reduction or headcount reduction? And the truth of it is, the answer is no. What we're finding is that it's more about reallocating those resources to do more meaningful things, right? Moving out of a constant state of preparation and move into more of a review level, right? And just really shifting the dynamic, and which is often much more fruitful as well, of a task than just mining through spreadsheets over spreadsheets, and preparing something that is never necessarily going to be fully, once you get it across the finish line, it's then, okay, now we need to review it as quickly as we can to get it, get the close done. So now that we have that, sooner in the process, and the dependency over getting it done by month end, going back to the continuous accounting, with automation, potentially now we can pull that stuff forward. We can start looking at transactions, mid-month or after the first week, or some cadence other than just on a monthly basis, because we've got more time to review. And I think that's an important component of it.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay, so just a couple of examples, really here to provide hope in a way. So, in these examples, I chose two because they represent sort of a tough case that was solved effectively. So in the media vertical in particular, in our client base, we see the confluence of two conflicting things. We see some pretty heavy complexity in the transactions they're required to process, and also the size of the transactions typically is lower, which means that for a given size revenue, the volume is higher. And so, as an example, I mean, we have clients that are processing literally hundreds of thousands of transactions a day. As soon as you hit those levels, even if only a small percentage of them are truly complex, you're still talking in the thousands or tens of thousands of transactions. And so, this is a good example, and there's multiple, even just within our own account base, there's multiple examples of this where they have, recurring billing models. Some of them have fairly complex billing that, bills change based on tiers and minimums and overages and things like that. In the RevRec side of the equation, they have allocations against standalone selling price. They have contract modifications, which I feel is one of the more complex areas of the guidance. They have all the reporting requirements, and in a couple of these cases, they are very close to 100% automated. Now, I will put the caveat out there that Kyle brings up in discussing level 2, in the sense that the business at this level is probably somewhat standardized, and in this case, certainly it is. So, the challenge remains, if you have a lot of non-standard contracts, can you get there? How do you get there, et cetera? But in these cases anyway, they're doing, I would argue, extreme levels of complexity at extreme volume through automation. So, it's a good data point that it can get done. The second example was not as high on the volume side, but a good case study, this time in the healthcare space, where, we have a client that's running a very traditional business, and a very steady business, a transactional business. There wasn't a lot of recurring revenue. RevRec was not so complex. And, in this case, they had the simultaneous event of, timelines that drove them to have to support 606 processing, in this case in general, but coincidentally a large acquisition that occurred, and a large acquisition that occurred where the acquired company, roughly equivalent volume, some percentage less, but also an entirely different model, more recurring revenue, etc. I found it very interesting because, the confluence of those two events, it can be devastating in some situations. And they were able to solve, through two things, I think. One, they were able to leverage out of the box solutions. And in this case, it was, obviously software we provided and other components that they got on the open market. And critically, I think they had a good infrastructure within their IT organization, in the sense of people that knew how to quickly integrate systems. And it's something that's overlooked, I think, even in this modern era, which we'll talk about in a second, of we're getting to a point with the cloud and with the variety of point solutions that are available, improvements in the platforms, where you can find pretty deep functionality out of the box. And particularly if you open the universe to point solutions, then there are a number of them that are, not only are they deep in functionality out of the box, but they differ from one another. So it's more likely you'll find one that lines up with your business practices. But as Kyle and Chad have pointed out, and I think it's very important, with this move toward point solutions, more solutions, cloud solutions, comes the need to be able to link these things up, right? And so the investment in a resource or two that are very good at linking these things up, to me, it is money well spent, and probably should be a permanent position, because I just think as you're growing, as you're adding more solutions, as you're adapting to the business, there's always going to be a need for at least some level of this. So, and we can probably go to the next slide, Ian. So to wrap up, I realize we're running out of time here. A couple of major points we've brought up from this. The first I would say is that, I think highest level automation was the province of the Fortune 50, Fortune 500 in the past. I do see a definite path, moving well down the spectrum for companies that are in the SMB range to get to higher levels of automation. I think the technologies, the rate of change in technology, the whole market, the whole world is catching up to it. But between, the cloud itself, and the near explosion in point solutions that are available, infrastructure technologies like a good middleware layer, RPA, they're all helping in this. And I think what the end state will be when we get through all the buzz and the hype and all of that is that you'll have a higher level of automation and agility at a vastly lower price point than was attainable even 5 years ago. So I do think there is good news on the horizon here. Like we said, to me, one of the important things is, fully on board with the micro step strategy that Chad introduced in the first part of the presentation. And in the context of that, I do think it's good to have a plan with definite goals and, certainly definite value at each move you make. So you want to automate maybe rev rec because of 606 or your lease accounting, AR, what have you. Just think about it in terms of, what is the standalone value of this? Where am I in the beginning of this step? Where will I be at the end of this step? And what should I expect in terms of the return, if you will, and go step by step. As far as a framework goes to think about this, I mean, we always put forward the framework of thinking about it like, where are my biggest pain points in terms of my functional areas, and focus on shoring up those functional areas. And then, in conjunction or subsequent to that, think about, okay, what can I do to make sure that I'm able to manage these integrations between these areas better, whether it means bringing on a resource, possibly investing in a middleware layer, what have you. I mean, the systems just need to, to the extent that the systems can talk to each other and you can be flexible there, it's a huge improvement. Increases automation. Also, at the end of the day, it probably increases the flexibility of the entire picture. After that, you can move into things like RPA, which can just extend the reach and the automation further. And the other good news to wrap up is that there's so many changes that have either happened or coming down the pike between, like the last bullet says, 606, 842, 340, the statutory tax change. I mean, plenty of things to motivate taking a first or a next step. And getting started. And with that, I think we move to the survey, Ian.
Yep, that is correct. Once the webinar ends, the survey will just pop up in the GoToWebinar console. So thank you all for attending. Tom, Chad, Kyle, thank you very much for presenting.
Right, thank you. Sorry we didn't have time to get to questions, but we will try to respond in email. And definitely give us whatever feedback you can in the survey. We really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great day. Have a great Thanksgiving holiday.
Thank you. Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.